today's hosts are James Murch and Amber Walls. And our guest today is Nathan Roan. Take it away, Amber.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Roan, for being with us today.
Sure.
So can you tell us how you came on Cranberry?
How I first got here?
Yep.
I first came to Cranberry in the summer of 1950. And the connection through which I got here was a college friend of my father's had a summer house here, Bob Cumming. And Bob's father was a minister here on the island, summer minister, for many years, first back in the 20s and then again in the 50s. And so that's how we got here.
Will you tell us what you remember about the early years of Beal and Bunker?
Early years of Beal and Bunker. So Beal and Bunker started, I want to say around 1951, 52, and they built, I don't know, you must have seen pictures of the dock, I'm sure. It looked a lot like the Fisherman's Co-op on Islesford. And it had a big bait shed with big tubs of herring bait. It smelled like the real Maine. And you know, the bait was both for bait for lobster traps, and there was also fishing going on, you know, like cod and haddock and occasionally halibut. And they used to have these long trawls. It would be a long line with short lines with big hooks coming off at certain intervals. And they would put a herring on each hook and very carefully coil the trawls into the tubs. And it was always a wonder to me that they could do it without getting the thing totally snarled. And then they would take them out offshore, and there'd be an anchor at each end and a float at each end to mark them, and probably a flag or something. And they'd leave them for a day or two, and then they'd come back and haul them up and pick the fish off. And they used to get a lot of fish, mostly haddock and cod. And for a number of years, Beal and Bunker sent a boat down to Vinyl Haven to sell fish. And what's now the post office was originally built as a freezer for freezing and refrigerating fish, you know, to hold until they were shipped. And in addition to that, obviously they had the mail boat. They also sold gasoline. They had out on the dock a little room where in the early years you just kind of sat around. There was a Coke machine. You know, a bottle of Coke was 10 cents. And you just opened the top, you took out your Coke, and you gave them 10 cents. And then they started a restaurant. And a couple other things that Beal and Bunker did. I think maybe I gave you a couple of questions. One was they used to run boats to the fireworks in Bar Harbor on the 4th of July. And we would anchor in Bar Harbor, and they would shoot the fireworks off the town dock in Bar Harbor. And you'd hear the great big bang, and then, you know, 10 seconds later, you hear this whole echo through all the mountains. So it was like hearing it 3 times. The other thing I remember is the movie boat that Wilfred ran on Monday and Saturday evenings. And it seemed like it was mostly the young folks. I don't think any adults other than Wilfred who ran the boat were on the boat. And this was when he still had the Bobcat. And we would all go down in the cabin down below and just fool around down there. And when we got to the dock in Southwest Harbor, this is the old town dock next to the Beal's Lobster Pier. And as you've probably heard, you know, the mailboat used to come out of Southwest Harbor. And so all the kids, we'd run up to the center of town, and the movie theater was right on the corner of Main Street and Clark Point Road. And we'd see the movies, back in those days, the movies always began with a newsreel, because most people didn't have television back then, and usually a cartoon, Bugs Bunny, something like that. And then after the movie, we would all run back down to the boat, and the boat was 25 cents round trip, and I think the movie was either 25 cents or maybe 50 cents. So it was a lot of fun for the kids.
Does that mean that there were stores on Cranberry in the 50s?
In the early 50s, and I was never there, but Wilfred and Todd's father, Elisha Bunker, had a store on Dog Point, which I think closed in 51, 52. I didn't really know that store. Sadie and Ralph Bulger had a little store down in the house next to where Ruth Westfall is now, going toward the dock, the next house. They had a little store that sold a few items. What interested kids most was the penny candy counter. And that store, I think, lasted till sometime in the mid-50s. And oftentimes I'd go to the store and there would be nobody in it, so you'd walk to the back door and knock on the door, and either Sadie or Ralph would come out. You know, they were quite elderly at that time, so they'd walk very slowly to the store and sell you whatever you wanted.
That
So
sounds nice.
Yeah.
Did people have telephones on Cranberry in the 50s?
I thought that the only phone was a pay phone, but Phil told me there were 4 or 5 phones in the early 50s, but it was quite unusual. So there was a barn down below Clarence Beale's house, and Clarence used to live in the house where Jan Moss is now. And in that barn was a pay phone, one of the old-fashioned ones where you'd speak into it. You'd pick up the earpiece and you'd speak into it, and you put your nickel in, and the operator in Southwest Harbor would pick up, and you'd tell the operator who you were trying to call. So my mother always used to order her groceries from Jackson's Market in Southwest Harbor. And there were other markets too. There was Trundy's that a lot of people ordered from. There was Sawyer's, which is the only one that still exists. And there was an A&P. And they would put the order, they'd drive it down to the dock, put it on the mailboat, and Beale and Bunker would bring it over. And every summer, Beale and Bunker hired a young kid to drive a pickup truck and deliver groceries all the way up the road. And one thing I remember, you know, I have 2 brothers. You know, if one of us was sick and needed to see the doctor, or my mother needed to consult with the doctor, she would call. And so she'd tell the operator, you know, I'd like to speak to Dr. Wilbur. Well, the operator's office was in the 2nd floor above the A&P, which is in the building. There's an ice cream shop there now. I think there's a little park. You're coming up Clark Point Road at the junction of Clark Point and Main Street, just slightly to the left. There's a little park. To the left of that, in that building, was the A&P. And Dr. Wilbur's office was on the 2nd floor, directly across the street. And I remember my mother once called and asked to speak to Dr. Wilbur, and the operator said, she looked out the window, she said, well, Dr. Wilbur's not in, because she could see. Didn't even have to ring the phone over at his office. But, you know, normally you'd get through to him. So that was the early days of phones here.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about Harold Alley's shark?
Yeah, so Harold Alley was one of the fishermen here on the island, and he had 2 brothers, Harry Alley, who's the father of Mark Alley, whom you know, and Chetty Alley, who lived on Islesford. And the 3 of them, this is I'm getting into the tuna fishing at the moment, and then we'll get to the shark. They were the best tuna fishermen here in the area back then. And so I used to go out tuna fishing with Harold Alley. This is when I was about 15. And we'd go out beyond Baker's Island, sometimes beyond Duck Island, out in that area. And it had to be a day when it was fairly calm, because you see the tuna, when they're close to the surface, you see the fin just breaking the water. So it's just a little bit above the water. And if it's choppy, you just can't see it. And so we just, circle around, and sometimes you saw a fin, and then we'd go after it. And there were other days when we went out and saw nothing. But when we got up close to a tuna, Harold would get up on the little pulpit on the bow of the boat, and I would steer the boat. And as we got close, we could not change the engine speed because the sound would catch the attention of the tuna and they would dive. And so he would take the harpoon and throw it. And, he didn't always hit, but when he did, there was a little dart on a line that went into the fish, and then there was, 100 feet of line and a barrel and a flag. And we would just let the tuna run. Didn't try to haul it in right away. And we'd go on looking for other tuna. And then at the end of the afternoon, we'd kind of keep track of where the flags were if there was more than one. We'd go and we'd haul it in. And depending on where he had hit the fish, it might be dead or it might still be alive. And so sometimes it was a bit of a battle getting it on the boat. And these tuna were 7 or 8 feet long, weighed anywhere from 400 to 600 pounds. So he would put a rope around the tail, and he had the hoist that all the lobster boats have to hoist the fish up alongside, and then get a hook in the mouth and lift it over the side. I don't know how he managed to, most of the weight is still below the gunwale of the boat, how he managed to get them in. And so we got, the best day we got 5 tuna. And that's, you're talking 2,000, 2,500 pounds of tuna fish. That's a lot. And they would bring them in. They would freeze them in the post office there, or they were sold fresh over in Southwest Harbor. This was before the days now when, tuna brings big dollars in Japan. This was all sold here in the States. So the shark, this was a time I was not with Harold, but he was been out looking for tuna, and I guess didn't see any tuna, but he harpooned a shark, something called a baskin shark, which was like 20 feet long. It was almost as long as his boat. And there was no way he was getting that on the boat. So he towed it in behind the boat. And, all the boats had the ship-to-shore radio, so everybody knew that Harold had a shark. And so he came into the Veland Bunker dock, and they had a hoist there. And they put a hook in the shark's mouth and started hauling it up. And, dock started creaking, the hoist started creaking. They were afraid it was going to damage the dock. So they let it back down, and they brought it up on the beach next to the ramp where the trucks and cars come on now. And it sat there on the beach for a couple of days, a little smelly, and then he towed it off and sank it somewhere out at sea. But that was a bit of excitement. So that's Harold Alley's shark.
What was the movie boat?
The movie boat, I think I told you about that earlier.
Oh, right. Where was the post office in the 50s and who ran it?
The post office was in the house where Kevin Wedge now lives. And his grandmother, Ethel Wedge, was the postmistress. And there was another set of stairs besides the one that's there now. You'd come up, and I don't know, it was probably her living room or something that she had divided, so there was the area, behind the boxes, just like in the post office that you know now. And then there was a lobby where people would wait for the mail, and people would chat while Ethel was sorting the mail, and there'd be a certain amount of chit-chat back and forth. And so that was there till, I'm going to guess, around 1960, plus or minus a bit. And then it moved down to the where it is now. And there have been several different postmistresses over the years.
Well, do you know if there were more year-round residents or more summer residents in the 50s?
There were more year-round residents. And it seemed like everybody was related. There were the three real old island families with the Sperlings and the Stanleys and the Bunkers. But it seemed like almost everyone was related to one of those families. And I remember the kids calling all the adults aunt or uncle, even if they weren't. Most of the time they were. The year-round population here, I think, peaked around 1920, more or less, and had declined ever since. Well, ever since until maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Now it's, thank goodness, it's coming back up, which is nice to see. And the summer population has continued to grow, as you know.
Where were the boat building and boat yards in the 50s?
The boatyard and the pool that Sam Donald runs now, that was run by Red McAllister, who was the father of, what's her name? Married to Junior Bracey. Lorraine's father. He was a boat builder. So there was that one. And then the Beal and Bunker had a couple of boat sheds, and they built several boats there. They built the Island Queen, I think, which is now used by the Cranberry Cove company, I think sometimes, or maybe on a different route, because it doesn't come in here anymore. And the Sea Princess, and there were several other boats that they built there. Some that were, built for other customers not here on the island. And the people that worked on those boats were Red McAllister, Charlie Rice, Fillmore Peterson. I think Clarence worked on them. And there were probably others.
So how did you get into your line of work?
How did I get into my line of work? I have to say it probably started here on Cranberry Island. As you may know, I'm a woodworker. And I started building a little hut behind the house. And I was able to scrounge scrap lumber kind of all over the place. Somebody had just redone their whole wraparound porch, and so all the old lumber was lying around, and they said I could have it, so I hauled that up to where I built this hut and used that. There were some old boat sheds that were falling apart. In fact, one that collapsed one day. I was standing on the Beal and Bunker dock on a perfectly calm day, and all of a sudden this boat shed just totally collapsed. And And this was right next to where Ed Gray's boatyard is now, in that area. And so I would scavenge lumber from all of that. And I built several different huts over the years.
When and where were you born?
I was born in New York City, and at the age of about 2, moved to suburbs outside New York, and I grew up in the New York suburbs. And then came to the Boston area in 1965 for college. And I've been there ever since.
What was it like there growing up?
What was it like
Yeah, where you were growing up.
where I was? Yeah, it was suburbs. You know, we didn't have the kind of traffic that kids in suburbs and cities and towns have now. You know, we used to play in the streets all the time. You know, kids would, roller skating was a big fad at one point. Everybody had roller skates and would be roller skating up and down the street. There was one thing I remember, you know, there were delivery trucks, so, you know, milk was delivered by the milkman. There was a bakery that delivered bread called Krug's Bakery in our neighborhood. And they used to put out a little cartoon book for kids that they distribute once a month. So, you know, when they stopped in our neighborhood, you know, and they had a new edition of Peter Wheat, we'd all get a copy and we'd all sit down on the curb and read the Peter Wheat comics. So those are the things that I remember. You know, bicycling around a lot.
Did you enjoy school?
Did I enjoy school? Yes.
What kind of student were you?
What kind of student? Pretty good. Not the top of the class, but pretty good.
Do you have any favorite stories from school?
Any favorite stories from school? Trying to think. Well, I will say, in high school, I was on the stage crew, so I would build sets for plays. And that was also using my woodworking interest and skills. I used to build the sets and then run the lights during the plays. And the one thing that those of us on the stage crew like to do, up in the booth where they would show, you know, movies from, there was also what was called a follow spot, a big light that you could move around and to focus on one character. And I remember that every fall there was always a sports awards ceremony. And there was one coach, I think a football coach, if I remember correctly, who somehow was a longtime favorite there among the students from way before my time. And, you know, as soon as he would walk on stage, everybody would be applauding. And so we'd have to follow him with the spotlight.
That's a cool story.
Yeah.
Was there anyone in particular that influenced you in your life growing up?
In my life. I would say my father a lot. My father was really excellent at relating to, I have 2 brothers and a sister who's much younger, so my 2 brothers and I, you know, we're all within 5 years of each other. And my sister is 12 years younger than me, so she's almost like another family. And my father was very good at spending time with each of us on what we were interested in. So for me, it was, you know, doing the woodworking. For my brother David, he was into collecting butterflies. And so he would help him collect butterflies, and he would get him a net for collecting, and they used to, and he would make little boards. When my brother would catch a butterfly, he'd very carefully get it out of the net, and this isn't very nice, but he would put it in a little jar with carbon tetrachloride to kill it. And then he'd take it out and put it on a board where the boards were sort of sloped a little bit, and the body was in between, and you put strips of paper across the wings and hold it there for a week or so, and then that way it held its shape. And he used to display them in cigar boxes that my father would get from the cigar stores.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
What did I want to be? I think I wanted to be a carpenter. I spent a lot of time going around to new houses in our neighborhood. There were always houses being built, and watching the carpenters. And then after they'd go home at 4 o'clock, I'd go around and I'd scavenge scraps, and I'd pick up all the nails that they dropped each day, and probably used them on my hut here.
So I guess that means you liked your job.
Yes. So what I did in the, over the many years was mostly cabinet work and architectural millwork. So any kind of cabinets that you could imagine building into a house, whether it would be a kitchen or a home library, whatever. And then more recently, about 10 or 15, a little over 10 years ago, I got interested in wooden boat building. And I built 4 boats, and that was a real change, because all the cabinet work and carpentry is straight lines and right angles, and as you know, boats are curves. And so, if you call a curve that's nice and uniform, you call that a fair curve, as opposed to something that's wiggly. So all the lines on a boat have to be fair. So, the radius may be changing as it moves toward the bow. And, you go further aft and it's almost straight. And, so that's this way, and then the hull, and how to lay out all those curved pieces. That was a whole new skill for me.
What lessons has your work life taught you?
What lessons? Well, to do your best, but to be honest, be fair, to the people you work for, the people that work for you, all of those things. Treat people respectfully. Don't waste materials. Don't waste people's money on things that aren't worthwhile. Things like that.
If you could do anything now, what would you do?
If I could do anything now, I wish I had the strength and energy that I had a few years back. I used to hike all the mountains over on Mount Desert all the time, and at this point, it's gotten harder for me to do. And I did a hike yesterday, but it was much shorter than the ones that I used to do. So I miss being able to do all the hikes there. And I hope you have both gotten over there and hiked in Acadia. Have you?
No.
No? Well, you're missing a great resource. Hundreds of thousands of people come every summer to visit Acadia. And here you are, 2 miles across the water from it. So you can get a trail map and get out and hike. And the views from the top of the mountain are spectacular. And if you go, in a few weeks when the blueberries are ripe, you'll be able to pick blueberries on top of some of the mountains.
Do you plan to retire? And if retired, do you like it?
I am more or less retired. I'm semi-retired. I'm not doing much in the way of paying work anymore and haven't for the last few years. One of the things that I am doing with my skills is I volunteer a couple times a week with Habitat for Humanity that builds housing, affordable housing for people who need it, and there's a great need, particularly among the immigrant communities. So I've been working in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is one of the old mill towns on the Merrimack River, and that has a large population of Dominican people.
Can you tell us a little bit how the island has been different than it is today?
How it was different, or how? Well, there were far fewer people. For this whole, next year it'll be 70 years since the first time I came here. And I've always stayed in one of those 2 houses that the family has now. And there's just so much more traffic, both day trippers coming on and trucks. I mean, there's some days when I feel like I'm living on Route 1 over in the mainland. Goodwin has a truck full of gravel going by every 20 minutes, it seems like. So, just more people. But it's nice to have the Cranberry House here and the facilities here. One of the things that's changed, we used to have activities in the firehouse across the street. There would be bingo nights 2 or 3 times a summer, where everybody would sit at tables and you know about bingo. So we'd play bingo. There were, and I think there still are sometimes firemen suppers to raise money for the fire department. But there was regularly 2 of them, one in July and one in August. And of course, the fair has been going for far longer than I've been alive. What else?
Where else have you lived or summered?
Or summered? Basically, I have summered here. I would say, I think there were only 2 or 3 summers in all those years that I was not here at all. But, I lived in, I went to college out in Wisconsin and in Boston, and I spent a year of college studying at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. But otherwise, since 1965, I've lived in the Boston area in different places.
Do you have a favorite Cranberry Island walk?
Favorite Cranberry Island walk? I love going out to Great Head. And it's nice having that new trail that goes out there. I wish that they would continue the trail and clear a path out all the way to the end of Great Head, because it's pretty overgrown in the woods. So, at low tide you can kind of walk on the beach and get out there. At high tide it's a scramble through the brush and fallen trees. We used to do lots of picnics too, where we'd take lobsters and we'd make a fire on the beach somewheres. So one place was out at Great Head, sometimes just behind the house where we lived, sometimes out on Jimmy's Point there, beyond Murray's house. Those were favorite spots. spots to go.
What is your earliest memory of the island?
I was just mentioning this yesterday to Chuck Lebo when I was coming over on the boat. When I first came over to the island in 1950, we came over with Eber Sperling, who lived in the house that the Vances have now, kind of diagonally across from where we are. And he had a little open boat, and I don't know if you've heard of something called a make and break engine. It's a single cylinder engine, and had a great big heavy flywheel. And to make it go forward, when you started it, you'd spin the flywheel one way, and if you needed to go in reverse, you had to stop it and start it by spinning the flywheel the other way. And it was a real kind of putt-putt thing. And he didn't have a wheel like you see on most boats. Some boats have a stick that's right on the side, and just by pushing that stick forward or backward, it was connected to a line that was connected to the rudder that would turn the rudder for steering the boats. And so that's what he had back then. And actually, Chucky told me that that Eber had the mail boat contract, I guess, back in the 40s in that open boat.
Well, what is the funnest thing that's happened to you recently?
What is the funnest thing that's happened to me recently? Well, I think it's been a lot of fun. When we first came, we overlapped with my son and his wife and my two grandsons. So to see them enjoying Cranberry Island to the same extent that we did when we were kids, and to see my older grandson, Eli, who's 7, said, "I want to stay on Cranberry Island all summer." And that's how we felt back then. And I'm glad that he feels that way now.
What are your hobbies?
My hobbies are gardening. I grow vegetable. I've been growing vegetable gardens ever since I was a kid. And sailing. And I have a sailboat that I built, which is out here in the harbor now. And I enjoy sailing that around here. And hiking. It's getting harder for me to do. I can't go as far, or I get more tired, particularly if I have to go uphill. But those are the things that I really enjoy. I enjoy being outside in nature, and watching the changing season, and watching, particularly in the spring when everything's coming up, and seeing what's new in the woods and what's blooming and all those things.
Do you have any pets?
We have one cat named Mish Mish, which means apricot in Hebrew, and she's a real sweetie. She's anytime we sit down, she's on our lap, and she's in bed with us a good part of the night. She's very sweet.
If you were to give advice to me or any other children coming to the island, who would it be?
What would it be? To get out in the woods and on the shore, and appreciate the beauty that you have all around you here, and get over to Acadia and go do a hike. There's lots of trails over there to do, and places to go swimming too. Maybe you've been swimming at Echo Lake.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, at the beach or off the rocks.
The rocks.
Yeah. There's also, if you climb Sargent Mountain, right between Sargent Mountain and Penobscot Mountain is a small pond called Sargent Pond, and you can swim in that pond. So it's really nice after you've done a long hike up to the top of Sargent Mountain, we would go for a swim in Sargent Pond. So we Well, our favorite hike that we did as kids with our parents involved having 2 cars, and first we'd leave one car over by Jordan Pond House, and that would be the end of the hike. And then we'd take the other car around to where we started, which is on the road between Northeast and Soamesville, and we'd go up Sergeant Mountain from that side. And there's a really beautiful trail called the Giant Slide Trail, where you're going up along a stream, and there are rocks, and there's one place where this large section of granite has sort of slipped away from the main body of the mountain, and it's like a passage, like a tunnel. It's probably 50 feet long. You walk through it between this loose slab, you know, which weighs several tons. You walk through it as you go on up there. And, you know, it's nice all the time. It's really nice, you know, if there's been a lot of rain and there's water in the stream. And then we would go up to the top of Sergeant Mountain and we'd have lunch there. And I remember after lunch, my mother would always lie down take a nap on the rocks. And then we'd go down to Sergeant Pond and we'd go for a swim. And then we'd go down the other side by Penobscot Mountain and down a steep trail and end up at Jordan Pond House and have popovers. So, and there's lots of trails over there that you should explore.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rome, for coming in today. I think we've been through all of our questions.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm sorry that I was late.
It's fine.
It's okay, we still like you.
I passed. Okay. Well, I enjoyed this.
Can you hitch a ride back?
Can you hitch a ride back? Sure.
Only because I think someone's leaving.
What's that?
Amina's leaving this morning. So
Amina.
is leaving.
Oh, right. What time?
11:51.
Okay. Okay. So do you two do this each week with different people or different kids